So good afternoon and welcome to the Spanish session of the International Conference on Multilevel Governance and Children's Rights, Challenges and Achievements in the EU, Italian and Spanish context. My name is Marc Grau. I'm a lecturer at the International University of Catalonia, and it's a pleasure to moderate this session. Do you know that we have two parallel sessions this afternoon? One is about Italy and another one about Spain. This one is about Spain. And I would like to thank you, the University of Padua, for organizing this event, to all the speakers for joining us and learn together about this crucial topic, and all the participants that are here now with us online, and the future ones that will join us once the video is already on YouTube. So thank you for your interest, and at the end of the discussion, so we can try to answer all your questions, comments. So thank you. So how it will work? As you can see in the program, we have 5 lovely presentations, and we will try to do this dynamic and fresh. So the maximum time per presentation is 20 minutes. And as a moderator, I will not only introduce each speaker, but I will try also to be the timekeeper. So 3 minutes before the end of your talk, I will inform you that you have 3 more minutes. And then at the end, at around 3:20, after the presentation of our last speaker, Ricardo Ibarra, we will open, as I said, the discussion to the audience, and we will be more than happy to answer all your questions. As we said previously, 2 presentations will be in Spanish, and we have like the simultaneous translation, and 3 in English. And now that the logistics are clear, let me introduce the 5 presentations this afternoon. First, Professor Aida Kisonaite, the principal investigator of CRIMS, Mainstreaming of Children's Rights, Multilevel Governance Perspective, which is the project that makes possible some of the studies that will be presented this afternoon and have been presented this morning. Together with Simone Delicati, will present an overview about children's rights mainstreaming in the European Union. Then secondly, Marc Grau, myself, will present a study about the barriers, but also the facilitators about the fuller realization of the Convention of Children's Rights in Spain and Catalonia. After my presentation, we feel very privileged to have the participation of Maria Jesus Larios, Deputy for the Defense of the Rights of Children and Adolescents in the Catalonian Ombudsperson, who will talk about the role of the regional ombudsman for the protection of children. Our 4th presentations will be from Professor Montserrat Gas and Professor Maria Fernandez Rojo, who will discuss about children's rights and policies in Europe, realities and challenging in Spain. And we will finish our round of presentations from a 3rd sector perspective. And who better than Ricardo Ibarra, the director of the Platform of Children's Organization in Spain, for doing this. So I feel very privileged of moderating such impressive speakers. And without further ado, let me introduce in more details our first speakers. So they are Professor Aida Kisonaite and Simone Delicati. Professor Kisonaite is a researcher at the University of Padua, Italy, at the Department of Political Science, Law, and International Studies. And as I said before, the principal investigator in the project CRIM, Mainstreaming of Children's Rights, Multilevel Governance Perspective. She's a former director of the Interdisciplinary Research Center for Children's Rights. And Dr. Aida Kisonaite is an academic lawyer and political scientist working in the field of human rights, with a particular attention on groups of the most vulnerable children and young. On the other hand, let me introduce Simone Delicati, who is a research collaborator of the CRIMS project, and a master in human rights and multi-level governance in the Human Rights Center at the University of Padua. So welcome both of you, and whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marc, for this wonderful introduction and for moderating this session. I'm very glad to have the possibility to talk here in the Spanish session. And just 1 second, because I would like to share my screen with you? Can you see it? Can you see it?
Yes.
Just a second. Okay. Perfect. So really many thanks for this possibility. And with our presentation, me and Simonia would like to provide a bridge between this morning session and this afternoon session, and to link European and national levels of governance in protecting children's rights. We had this morning the session about the European Union's role in protecting children's rights and about the current initiatives, current strategies, very important strategy. We talked a lot that the European has adapted, the EU has adapted recently. So in our presentations, I will be talking more about the EU's role from the theoretical perspective, and my colleague Simone Delicati will give you some insights more from the practical side of EU, and will talk about the challenges that the European Union has to meet and how to overcome them in ensuring the protection of children's rights. So our presentation is called Child Rights Mainstreaming in the EU towards a fully fledged EU child rights strategy. So let me start. And first of all, I want to emphasize that the European Union does not have a long-lasting tradition in protecting children's rights. Until 10 years ago, the EU action in this field was characterized by a fragmentary approach, and there was no reference to children in the EU treaties. The EU action for the protection of children was made of piecemeal provisions addressing particular child-related aspects in connection with broader issues of consumer rights, free movement of individuals, and cross-border family law. The change happened in 2009 when the consolidated version of the treaty on the European Union entered into force on the 1st of December and stated for the first time that the European Union shall promote the protection of the rights of the child. Namely, it is enshrined in the Article 3 of the Treaty on the European Union. And at the same time, children's rights have also become part of the EU Charter for Fundamental Rights, which means that the EU institutions as well as member states have to promote, protect, and fulfill the rights of the child in all relevant EU policies and actions. It is important to mention that these norms create an ideological context for the protection of children's rights at the EU level. And why I'm saying ideological and emphasize this, because it is worth to mention and important to mention that the EU is not a party to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It has not ratified it, but it is bound by virtue of general principles of the EU law to comply with all the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child principles in relation to all matters that fall within the EU competence. And last year, we marked the 30th anniversary of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. In the wake of this 30th anniversary, children's rights protection in the EU is expected to undergo a phase of great change. And why it is so? It was also mentioned this morning in the presentations that in inaugural speech of the newly elected president of the European Commission on the 19th of July 2009, Ursula von der Leyen identified the creation of a comprehensive EU child rights strategy as a priority for her mandate. Accordingly, she also entrusted the Commissioner Nicola Schmidt and Vice President Dubravka Šuica with developing and coordinating the implementation of the European Parliament's proposal for a European Child Guarantee Scheme to secure free healthcare, education, early childhood education and care, decent housing, and adequate nutrition for vulnerable categories of children living in the EU. So, on the one hand, we have now a very clear goal, and on the other hand, we have to understand the measures that can be taken to achieve this goal. Here, I would like to remind you that the EU doesn't have a general competence to legislate on children's rights as a single specific EU policy and has to assess its competence to intervene in protecting children's rights on a case-by-case basis. What does it mean, how it works in practice? The EU's competence to act is regulated by three principles: principles of conferral, principle of subsidiarity, and principle of proportionality. Article 5 of the Treaty on the European Union establishes the principle of conferral, stating that the EU shall act only within the limits of the competencies conferred upon it by the member states, namely where it has been conferred legislative power under the treaties. Depending on the case, the EU can thus have exclusive competence under Article 3, shared competence under Article 4, or a complementary competence to support, coordinate, or supplement the intervention of its member states. In today's afternoon session, we will be talking more about three policy fields. So educational field, healthcare, and social protection. I would like to remind that the EU has a supporting role in these policy fields. So it basically has the role of coordination of the member states' actions. In addition to that, the EU's actions are regulated by other two principles, so namely principle of subsidiarity and principle of proportionality. According to the principle of subsidiarity, the EU can only act when its intervention is expected to be more effective than exclusive action by the member state. The principle of proportionality requires the EU not to exceed what is necessary to achieve the objectives of the treaties. On this basis, it is worth to mention that the legislative power of the EU has to respect these limits and is subordinated to the legislative autonomy of its member states, with particular regard to the areas of human health, education, youth, and fight against poverty and social exclusion, which are fundamentally implicated with child protection. It follows that the EU action for the safeguard and the promotion of social, educational, and health rights of children cannot directly imply the harmonization of member states' laws, but is mainly implemented through soft law solutions, including policy instruments and guidelines, as well as through campaigns, research, sharing of best practices, and funding. When we speak about soft law solutions, we of course have to speak about the concept of mainstreaming. Mainstreaming mechanism is considered to be one of the most powerful mechanisms of the EU to create a favorable contextual environment for children's rights protection. What mainstreaming of children's rights means? It is a mechanism of ensuring that all actors involved in the EU legislative and policy processes, as well as program design and implementation, comply with children's rights, including those that do not explicitly work on children's rights. Mainstreaming mechanism is based on the idea that no policy is child neutral. This means that the needs of children must always be integrated into law and policy making processes to achieve the objectives of Article 3 of the Treaty on the European Union that I was mentioning before. Although no policy is child neutral, in our today's event, we focus more on 3 policy areas, so education, health, and social protection. So let me just say a few words about these 3 areas and the EU actions. The social protection of children's rights is the area in which the EU has played a greater role in shaping the behavior of member states, focusing on combating child poverty and social exclusion. The EU efforts have consisted of some key policy initiatives, such as the establishment of the European Platform Against Poverty in 2010, the EU Agenda for the Rights of the Child of 2011, which has expired already. Then 2013, the European Commission's recommendation investing in children breaking the cycle of disadvantage, very important document. And one of the new initiatives is 2017, the European Pillar of Social Rights. And I have to say that the European Commission recommendations had already had the official evaluation of its outcomes, and the Commission ordered several studies to evaluate its own actions, and the results we have, they are not very positive. The observations indicate that the modest progress made in the direction outlined in the European Commission's recommendation 2013 is insufficient to the scale of the problem in many countries. Moreover, the European Commission's recommendation 2013 has not had real impact because very limited progress has been made in most areas in large number of countries with high or very high levels of child poverty or social exclusion. And we also have some indications, some recommendations about the most important priorities that needs a significant and urgent attention. And these are the distribution and persistence of child poverty, access to affordable child care provisions of a high standard, social inclusion and support for migrant children, equal sharing of work and family responsibilities between parents, and the transition from institutional to community-based child care services. So here I would like to stop with the field of social protection and to say a few words about EU action in the area of education. The EU action in the area of education primarily takes place through the project of a European education area to be realized by the end of 2025. And its implementing tool, namely the strategic framework for European cooperation in education and training. In particular, the EU has prioritized action in the areas of early childhood education and care, educational support for vulnerable groups of children, especially unaccompanied minors and Roma children, and school policies to support teaching and promote common values. All EU policies in these areas have been underpinned by the idea of education as a lifelong process, which must be started at the earliest stage possible, fostering children's basic skills and sustained throughout all levels of education in order to promote their social inclusion and mobility, as well as their well-being. In this sense, on the basis of the Barcelona objectives, the EU has advocated for inclusive and quality early childhood education and care, as a key instrument to foster children's welfare with particular regard to vulnerable groups of children. Unaccompanied minors and trauma children have been given greater attention with EU instruments promoting their education as part of integrated strategies combining child-centered and family-centered measures, responding to their best interest and fighting discrimination to ensure them equal opportunities. So here we have the example of the recognition of interdependency of children's rights, that educational rights are inseparable from the social rights and have to be implemented so to say, together as required by the international law, namely the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Speaking about the area of health, as compared to the other two areas, the EU intervention for the protection of children has been less intense in this area. However, over the last decade, the EU has passed from a fragmentary approach made of directives and decisions on market and consumer safety affecting children only tangentially to a children's rights-based approach supporting member states to address children's needs in the areas of mental health, informed consent to trials, physical activities, nutrition, and pediatric medicines. In this context, by promoting health as a necessary element of different policies, the EU has again recognized the indivisibility and interdependence of all children's rights as it is required by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And here I would like to stop now and to give a word to my colleague Simone Delicati, who will give some interesting comments about challenges and solutions of the EU's role in protecting of children's rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aida.
I will stop sharing my screen soon.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Mark, I would like to ask you, do I have 10 minutes or something like that?
Now officially we are in minute 15, but you are 2, so yeah, you can have like 7-8 minutes. I will try. I'm the next one, so I will try to.
I will be quick.
But yeah, take your time.
Thank you so much. So as Aida explained, over the last 15 years, over the last decade, we have seen great developments of children's rights protection in the European Union. However, the extent to and the way in which children's rights principles and provisions are actually implemented by member states and EU institutions themselves continue to be inadequate, with serious consequences for the condition of children on the ground. First and foremost, EU measures continue to be poorly implemented by member states. Most notably, a follow-up analysis of 2013 recommendation, as mentioned by Aida, have reported very low levels of implementation by member states, with only 4 member states making significant improvements, and all the others achieving very limited progress or even weakened protection under most areas under review. As a consequence, child poverty remains stable at worrying levels, with about 1 out of 4 children in Europe at risk of poverty or social exclusion, making it the children, the age group at greatest risk of experiencing poverty across the EU. In addition, actions to combat child poverty have not been given the necessary priority within the monitoring framework of the European semester, and the use of European Union funds on the part of the member states is reported to be inefficient, preventing the EU from providing an actual added value to the intervention of its member states. Remarkably, member states have recently refused the proposal of the European Commission to allocate 5% of their budget to under the next multi-annual financial framework for combating child poverty. However, lack of implementation does not only regard soft law instruments, but also the area of binding legislation, where the EU has repeatedly enacted sanctioning procedures against several of its member states for failing to persistent failure to implement EU directives. In particular, among the most recent examples, the EU had to initiate infringement procedures against the majority of its member states for not implementing the procedural safeguards directive, but also in the sensitive context of online sexual abuse with regard to the sexual abuse directives. Inadequate application of EU children's rights measures is then also present at the level of EU institutions. Which have been highly criticized for being unable to translate into practice their formal commitments to the promotion of children's rights principles. In particular, the European Union Commission has been highly criticized for being unable to provide mechanisms of child participation. Moreover, action of children's rights protection at the level of the Commission is seriously hampered by a lack of coordination among departments, which is especially due to the absence of child-specific bodies and figures directed to coordinate all the efforts of the Commission for protecting children's rights. At the judicial level, then, the ECJ seems to be particularly reluctant to address child protection and to engage with the principles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, of the CRC. In particular, the ECJ has dealt with only a few cases concerning children's rights, and the closer analysis has revealed that CRC principles are only sparingly taken into account, with the ECJ not really engaging with and grounding its judgment in the CRC. This mismatch between children's rights on paper and children's rights in practice suggests two considerations with regard to child protection in the European Union. On the one hand, it reinforces the idea that broader EU competence to adopt binding legislation, even if it is desirable, does not provide any reassurance on the degree of implementation and effectiveness of its measures. Binding legislation and related enforcement mechanisms are not necessarily the most performing tools to guarantee children's rights protection, also considering that children by nature face additional barriers to making legal claims. Remarkably, this emphasis on the binding legislation, on the discourse on the enforcement can be even detrimental by providing EU institutions with a scapegoat or a defensive narrative through which ineffectiveness or inaction can be easily attributed to their limited power. Against this background, on the other hand, this mismatch seems actually to highlight a lack of real attachment to the child rights culture underpinning the CRC. In fact, previous research has already highlighted how greatly the absence of child rights culture impacts on the capacity and effectiveness of institutions, governments, and stakeholders to actually effectively implement children's rights measures. Moreover, without a strong culture of respect for children's rights, the growing number of soft law but also hard law measures of the EU lacks a common ideological thread and comes to be ineffective. In other words, the degree of implementation of children's rights measures strictly depends on the consideration of children as autonomous right holders, with the same claim to dignity and rights of autonomous adults, and with the claim and the possibility to use these rights to exercise influence on their lives. So against this background, in order to make sure that children's rights protection is actually implemented on the ground, we suggest three priority dimensions to be considered in establishing the forthcoming child rights strategy of the European Union. The first dimension relates to the creation of political leverage through the appointment of a European Commissioner for Children's Rights. In fact, previous research has highlighted how the major achievements in terms of the implementation of the CRC, both at the level of the EU and of its member states, have come from their support by a particular political champion or a particular political body. Remarkably, the Commissioner's action has proved to be key to ensure the current implementation of children's rights in times of political change. For these reasons, the nomination of an ad hoc high-level political officer working in the European Commission exclusively on children's rights would probably help to present children's rights as a matter of fundamental European values, making the protection a high-level priority of the European Union. Moreover, this would help also to the second dimension, namely the generation of ownership, responsibility, and thus action among all the institutional stakeholders and the actors involved with children's rights protection through the establishment of a comprehensive child rights strategy based on the general measures of implementation of the CRC, as expressed by General Comment number 5. From the general comment, this strategy should not only entail ex-ante integration of children's rights principles in formal text, but also, and I would say especially, ex-post enforcement of these provisions through coordinated action capable of creating ownership and thus responsibility and in turn action among all the stakeholders involved with children's rights protection. The third dimensions then refer to the need of placing child participation, especially at the heart of EU institution and of all law and policy making processes. The EU should in particular be running focus groups with children, including the conclusion of these groups into formal text, into policy measures, and to legislative documents. Recently, an example in this sense was present in the feasibility study for the establishment of the European Child Guarantee Scheme. But these consultations with 4 groups of children were carried out as an ex post check to the study, namely after the conclusion of the study, preventing children from actually shaping the content of those policies that will eventually affect their future. So these focus groups should, of course, be conducted before, at the beginning of the policy or law making processes. This promotion of child participation would contribute to build a strong culture of consultation at all levels, including family, community, local and national levels, as required by the Bucharest Declaration, and would especially help to move the approach of the European Union towards a stronger rights-based approach, empowering children as autonomous right holders as required by the Convention. Finally, we argue that the use unilateral...
If possible.
Yeah, we argue that the EU unilateral accession to the CRC would act as a boost with regard to all the dimensions identified. This would be possible on the basis of Article 216 of the TFU through the conclusion of an international protocol of adhesion to the convention. And this would not only have a symbolic value by sending a highly symbolic message about the EU's attachment to the culture, to the values of the CRC, but this would also lead to a more coherent approach of the European Union to children's rights protection, better establishing its obligations and also obliging it to the monitoring mechanism of the committee of the CRC. Therefore, the EU should be obliged to undertake periodical reporting and assess its progress on children's rights protection against the general measures of implementation of the CRC, in turn improving the situation also at the level of member states. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you also. Thank you, Professor Kisunaite and Simone, for this lovely overview about children's rights mainstreaming in the European Union, and Simone also especially for presenting these challenges for making children's rights more concrete, and hopefully we can discuss it at the end. So let's move to the second presentation, if you agree. In this case, it's me. Sorry for the self-introduction, but very, very briefly, my name is Mark Grau. I'm a PhD in social policy at the University of Edinburgh. Currently, I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Education in the International University of Catalonia, and I'm the coordinator and researcher at the chair of childcare and family policies in the same university. And since 2016, I'm also a research fellow at the Women and Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School. And without further ado, let me start. So let me share my screen. Hopefully. So, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Perfect. So
yes.
I will do my timekeeper. I will try to do it in 15 minutes. So, but let me, control myself. So, today, as you can read here, the title of this presentation and this study is Barriers and Facilitators to the Full Realization of the Convention of Children's Rights in Catalonia and Spain, and to try to understand this through a qualitative study. So in this case, we decided to do in-depth interviews with policymakers, their sectors organization, and also vulnerable families. And we did this in Spain and in Italy, and more specifically in Catalonia and El Veneto. But today we will only present like the Spanish and the Catalan data. And this is super, super preliminary. So we are preparing different papers, different articles. And this is just a general overview what we have now, like potential barriers, like a list of and facilitators that can help or not, like the full realization of the CRC. So the agenda is quite classic. So we will start with the goal, then we will move to the context. We will present to you preliminary results and next steps. And I would like to thank you again, so Professor Kisonaite, for being the IP of this project and for allowing us to be involved in this super interesting study. So thank you. So the goal, as I said, so it's basically to explore the enables and the barriers that embody or not children's rights in Italy and Spain. And for doing this, we conduct like 28 in-depth interviews, and it's like an hour asking questions about how do you perceive this topic with policymakers, as I said, third sector organizations and families. Families was super, super interesting. We did all of them face-to-face in Barcelona, Valencia, Madrid, basically, except 5, if I'm not wrong, that we did it virtually using like now this system because it was in May and we was locked down, so it was not possible. And nowadays we have more than 300 pages of transcription. That is what we try to understand and we analyze and to link one with another. So as in the previous presentation, and as probably you all know, last year we did like the 3rd anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and it seems that it's a good, the momentum for great visibility. But as we will discuss the whole afternoon and the same in the morning, so we are still quite far, super far, but quite far from a complete realization. When we choose, and I don't want to be here super long, but when we choose Italy and Spain, we have like 3 main reasons. One is it's interesting to try to understand these 2 similar countries in the Mediterranean arc. We have this stronger families merit. It will be quite interesting to see what happened with children's rights. Then both of them has suffered the same paradox, if we can use this word, that we can consider Italy and Spain as rich countries. At least we have one of the highest GDP, but at the same time, we have this paradox where we have one of the highest child poverty in Europe and one of the highest early leavers from the education. So kids, that teenagers that doesn't finish like the school. And then we have quite, not exactly, but similar concluding observations from the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Just to have like a quick overview, this, I always like this table that is from UNICEF, and they provide me like the new data. Until now, I used to present like the 2019, now it's the 2020, but with data from 2019. So basically here, this is in Catalan, sorry, but basically we have like 2-3 important data. One is child poverty, as you can see, like FITA, its main goal. So our goal, the goal in 2020 was less than 20% of child poverty, but in Catalonia, again, so it's quite a rich region in Spain and in Europe. So we have 31%, depending on how you calculate, if you have Europe or the other ones. So 31 or 32% of child poverty in Catalonia. Similar numbers in Spain. So the goal was 20. The goal for 2030 is 10%. So clearly there is a red light here. We have a red light. Similarly with education. So early leavers, like the goal for 2020 was 12%, is 12% because it's this year. But the current number was 19, almost 20. It means that 1 out of 5 students doesn't finish the formal education. So it's, and we should try to work on this. And the goal for 2030 should be 5. So again, red line. This is the percentage here. Probably it's orange light. This is the percentage of GDP, the percentage of GDP to education. The goal was 4% for 2020. It's 3, almost there, but we are not there. And the goal is 7. So here in 10 years, so we have a lot of work to do. And finally, this is only the income related to the Alliance for these goals. So, and again, here, like a couple of comments from the committee in the same line. So they start as always. So here it's from March 2018 with with a positive side, and the committee really notes the progress on child and adolescent protection system. This is super positive, and they value the advancement in Spain and Catalonia. Also, the creation of childhood observatories, this is also positive, and then the commitment to the 2030 agenda. So this is a positive side, but where are the key recommendations? And the first one is the lack, they don't use the word lack, but it's like to guarantee, and guaranteed means that we don't really guarantee the alignment between regional legislation and national legislation. So this should be more aligned than nowadays. Then they really appreciate like all the norms, bodies, they are super fine, but it seems that we need like a final click that in order that the system works super efficiently in practice in order to fully implement all the children's rights. No? So we have everything, but we have like this final click in order that the system needs to work real efficiency in practice. And then I think as Simone present, like there is a call for more participation. So children's voices needs to be heard in administrative, judicial, mediation procedures. So we need to hear more about their voices, take their consideration, take their opinion, their voice, and we need to prepare these channels, all the mechanisms that make this possible. And then also they recommend to take measures, as we have seen in the UNICEF slide, to address the high rates on the school dropouts, and then to facilitate the access to the asylum to the children in need that they arrive in our country. So basically this is like a super short summary of the committee's suggestion. And let's focus on our results, 8 minutes. Basically, this is the way that we summarize, but again, we need to still refine this, and then this is super basic, but we find through the voices of all our participants, and we are super privileged and we feel super honored to have the opportunity to talk with so many interesting people. And in some sense, if we summarize all these voices, we have like 6 strengths, 6 weaknesses. So let's start with the first one. The first strength is that we have advanced, definitely. This is undeniable. So we have advanced in these 30 years. We can see a real progress. So we need to be happy with this. So all of the participants agree that we have advanced. That's one of our strengths. The second one is like we have a very good framework. So the setting is good. It's similar to what the committee said. So you have the bodies, you have the norms, you have a good legislation. So the legal framework work, and this is super positive. Another thing is like the application, the rules, the specific things. But the framework is good, and that's the second strength. The third one is quite interesting. Not all the participants mentioned this, but we think that we need to highlight this. That is that we in Spain and in Catalonia, we have a very good monitoring process, probably one of the richest, according to some of the participants, monitoring tools. It means that many institutions, not always the committee, but many institutions are very vigilant what is happening, and if Spain violates some of the rights or not. And because we have all this good monitoring process, sometimes we can have like the feeling that that we have many complaints and that Spain violate many rights, but it could be the other way. You know, it's like yeah. So we have this good system that complements like the committee and other ones, and we really think that is a strength. No, to have more eyes in our country is always positive. No, so that's a strength. The fourth one is like the creation of the commission for the fight against child poverty. So this body is like a minister, we say it in Spanish, ministerio sin cartera, but the good thing is that it's like in the same level as a minister, but without minister. But it allows like the body to talk face to face with other ministers, like Minister of Health, Minister of Education, and it depends from the presidency, and they have this direct relationship. So I think it's good news to have un alto comisionado in some sense. and to consider that in this case, child poverty is like a transversal issue that should be across different ministers and disciplines. The fifth one is this atomization, we call it atomization, but is like around the country, we can have like a powerful, like a big number of small, but at the same time powerful social entities that they are the hands, the final hands that are helping many families in need. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths that we have. So we have all these social entities trying to work for children's rights. And the sector itself is quite powerful, although they cannot be there alone, and the communication with the administration is not always the best, but they are doing like a crucial role in our country, and that's one of the strengths. Another point, it's a little bit controversial, but it's like some of the, especially the third sector institutions, they say that basically, so they got funding from the administration, but also a private funding, and private funding, it could come from a company, or in this case, a bank. In our case, we have a bank who decided that children poverty, children's rights is a topic. So they put a lot of money, and I think, and that's why we consider this as a strength. So it's always good to have more actors and private actors that decided that this social issue should be also attacked from the private sector, and they are there putting a lot of money with good budget. So many of the third sectors entities that we interview receive money from this bank. But in some sense, there is like the other part of the coin. Some perceive that at the end, so they have a model and they try to explain the model that they have in mind, and some perceive that it could be like they compete in some sense, like they are a parallel entity of social services in some sense. This is not 100% true, but that's the feeling that some people had in mind. But at the end, we consider it as a strength because we have more actors, and not don't take only the image of this bank, but more private. So the strength could be there is an awareness from the private sector that this is a problem that we need to deal with, and I need to run. So 6 weaknesses, sorry. The first one is, in order to respect the convention, first we need to know it. So that's super interesting. So how we really respect children's rights if we don't really know children's rights, if we don't really know the convention, no? So, and here some participants argue that the knowledge is not exactly the same from the state to the regional level, to the local level, to the families. Probably the state is the one, no, la Dirección General del Estado, who knows more about the children's right, and the family probably the one who knows less. And because the direct recipient of the obligation is not the same, because it's not the holder of the obligation, we can have this mismatch. But I think that the argument is super interesting. We don't know enough. So I'm not sure. I'm teaching sociology of the family, and we discussed this. And we don't know enough about the convention. And especially the positive side, for example, by law, because the convention, it's a law, it's not an utopia, no? And I think it's number 6, number 18, that it's to empower children, like to make possible that they are who are they called to be. So to empower children. So it's by law that we need to empower our children, not only to protect and to go to only to minimums, but also to go to the maximum that we can. Yeah, here's 6 and 18. Then another weaknesses is the political will. So it seems in general that, okay, so there is high consensus, but low in intensity. So at the end, in general, we have the feeling that it's not a political priority. Kids will not protest, parents we will not protest. And the programs are consolidated, but not fully. So until now, it seems that children's rights in general has not been like a political priority. The third one is like, we are good putting this illustrative example on Spain, Catalonia, in putting out a fire. So we are good firefighters, but we are not good cleaning the forest that is preventing. And even we award what we can call preventing plus, that is empowerment. So we are good protecting, but also we can criticize this, but we are quite good with the protection system. But it seems that what we really need to be better is with the prevention. But the prevention, the negative prevention is not only to avoid potential damages, but also to empower and to foster positive things, like to foster social bonds. And this third level is completely or almost completely ignored. I need to run. And then the fourth point is how can we respect the convention with these high levels of children poverty? And we think this is a super interesting point. No? With 1/3 of the children who suffer or who are in a position of risk of poverty, how can we really respect the convention, the rest of the rights, if with 1/3 of the children living in poverty? The fifth one is this lack of coordination between different departments. It's not only that there is some lack, even some people perceive there is some hostility that is even worse. So we really know if this is a priority, and we need to reduce all this and to really foster super positive coordination between all the departments. And the last one is in that there is a lack of the coordination between local level, regional level, and a state level. Sometimes they don't share all the data. And also we have the feeling that we don't value enough the local level, but the local level is like, I don't know, it's here, it's like, it's the last nerve, it's like the octopus. So it's like the hands and the eyes. So I think that we need to so we need to consider the local level as a super crucial level. So just to summarize, this is the 6 strengths that we perceive. We have we advance, we have a good framework, we have a good monitoring process, we have the creation of this High Commissioner for the Children's Rights, but in this case it's for children poverty. We have these small, powerful social entities. We have private sector there, but on the other side, we need to improve just knowing better the convention, making this topic a priority for policymakers. Then we need to improve the prevention. Then we need to keep fighting children poverty. And finally, we need to improve like interdepartmental coordination and the coordination between local, regional, and state level. So thank you. I think I did it on time or less. So thank you for your attention. At the end, we will have time for discussing all the presentations. So let me move. I don't know if you want to add something, but I think that we need to move to our third speaker. Again, thank you for your attention. And as I said, we have the pleasure to have between us Maria Jesus Larios, the Deputy for the Defense of the Rights of Children and Adolescents in the Catalonia's Ombudsperson. Dr. Larios has a PhD in law from the University of Barcelona and has been a professor of constitutional law in the same university. She has published different books, articles, and reports about institutions like the Parliament, if I'm not wrong, but also about immigration in Catalonia. And today she has a crucial role in Catalonia as a deputy for the defense of the rights of children and adolescents. So again, it's an honor to have you here and have her talk. As you can see, the program is about the role of the regional ombudsman for the protection of children's rights. So without further delay, please join me to welcome Maria Jesus Laria to our session. So Maria Jesus, the floor is yours. As you know, this, if I'm not wrong, this session will be in Spanish, but we have the option for the ones who are following the our conversation here via Zoom to click, if I'm not wrong, interpretation to change language. So thank you, Maria Jesus, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the seminar. As Mark said, I will make my intervention in Spanish, although I have prepared a PowerPoint in English. I tried to share. Just a second. Nice. I can. No,
Very
that's
good.
just,
Coming.
just a second. That is not the correct one.
Here we are.
Now you
Now,
can.
yeah,
Okay.
perfect. Very good, Melissa. So whenever you want,
Okay.
the floor is yours.
Ok. La sesión es sobre
The session will be about the role of the regional ombudsman or the ombudsman in general for the protection of childhood, so children. As Mark has already commented, I am part of an organization which is a general ombudsman with a specific mandate for the protection of children's rights. And for this reason, we have our organization has a specific legislation, regulation, and has a mandate according to which it needs to have a deputy ombudsman for the protection of children's rights. It was introduced in Catalonia in, Catalonia in 1989, on the same year of the Declaration for Children. There is a concern going around because of the situation of abuse and the lack of guarantees for the rights of children. With this legislation, the legislation of 2010, it better regulates the function of the protector of children, which had specifically the function to promote interest and rights of children. We have also to present an annual report before our parliament, the Catalan parliament, to provide the progress that we are making. But therefore, it is a human rights institution and it complies with the international human rights standards and children's standards. So it is a parliamentary ombudsman. It has an independent commission, like similarly what we have in the United Kingdom. Therefore, there is a third body, so checking on it, and all the defensors have a specific role inside it, and their role is to protect children's rights and promote governance processes in that sense. So they are very important agents for the convention to be applied. Mark and Aida and Simone have mentioned before me and underlined how the lack of priorities in applying policies at the European level, but also at the Spanish level. So there is a need to prioritize the implementation of these guarantees. So why the prioritization is not there? So we all agree on the importance treaties acknowledge it, but why is not prioritized yet? So it is very important to have specific agents protecting children's rights. And the function is promoting a strategy focused on the rights of children, and this has to be based on a broad holistic analysis. How the defenders can influence and protect these rights? Well, there is an interdependence, a combination between independence and persuasive power. It's something intrinsic in the ombudsman, which needs to implement its decision, but also has the possibility to be persuasive. And it is also its public and independent nature. So at the same time, places it halfway between governments and civil society. So it's a matter of finding agreement between different elements of political and institutional nature in order to satisfy the primary needs. Which are the challenges? Aida, Simone, and Mark have already mentioned that. While many challenges, for example, sometimes there is no awareness about the consequences on the policies, and then there is other budgetarian issues, institutional inertia, social resistance, based on the fact that they don't attach enough importance in situating and putting children's rights at the very center of the political attention. And there is another important challenge, which is the lack of so the children don't have any influence on pressure groups, so they need to have a role, they need to play a role in that, because some groups really influence the political decision process. Why? Because they are participating agents, because they can vote, and adult population can have representative groups, while children cannot have any pressure groups representing them. For this reason, hence, agents have such an important role for the protection of children's rights, because children would like to be represented but don't have the tools to achieve them. And this is quite clear when there are demonstrations in Spain, and when these demonstrations happen is that take place when there are a lot of social pressures and social tensions, which is also affected by the status of children. Therefore, children protection right is really play a really crucial role in the insurance of human rights altogether. Let's have a look at the framework of the action of the defenses, so specifically childhood defenses in Catalonia. Well, we start from the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which is a text enshrining a series of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of children, all contained in a single legal norm. Then there are 4 general principles, which are interpretative ether, and they include non-discrimination principle, the best interests of children, the right to life, survival, and development, but also the right to express their own opinions, taking due precautions depending on the age and degree of maturity of the person, of the subject. One of the most important aspects of a convention, as we mentioned earlier in the previous contribution, is that the children are often considered as subject of rights, but also they are considered as part, as member of a family and a community. Therefore, they are not recognized as a single person. So there is the need to recognize their need to support and develop and for them to prosper. So they need to be identified as single, independent person. And so remember that they actually depend on someone else for their survival. And the good thing about this ombudsman is that we have defenders, we have educators which will help to implement such guarantees, because children are very much vulnerable, and this depends on the fact that they cannot defend themselves, they cannot defend their own rights. They cannot ensure that they are correctly grown, directly fed. They depend on adults, indeed. And in this framework, so convention and of course internal legislation, so the national legislation which has implemented the convention, well, we find the 5 main functions of defense. And so what do we do? Well, from our what we do is promoting children participation. We also provide safe and proper environments for children. We also focus and attach attention on vulnerable children. We also focus on individual complaints, and also we focus on visibility, to give visibility to children and their best interests in policy making and in the decision process. As for the promotion of the participation, also the other speakers mentioned that, of course. So this is quite an important pillar, and there is quite a considerable lack in this area. And just thinking of the Scandinavian northern countries, they have progressed much more. For example, Scotland. Scotland has a very normalized participation, so they are able to allow good participation, while Spain and Italy are quite similar, and they both show a lack of real participation of children in the decision process, in the public decision process, but also in the family environment, school environment, so any environment well children basically spend their time, such as leisure time, or when any legal decision has to be taken on them. So there is a clear lack of participation. Let's have examples of actions of the Catalan ombudsman to ensure the implementation of these political rights. For example, we have promoted actions to recognize the right to strike of adolescents and children. Children as the workers normally they don't have children don't have recognized the right to strike, but they can show their their approach and what they do. They simply avoid they do their strike, just avoiding going to school. So this is important to ensure that this right is officially recognized. Or how children are represented in the communication media. Often they don't have an active role, they don't actively participate. Therefore, sometimes they are stigmatized, especially adolescents, which have been lately been blamed to be the transmitters of virus. So why this? Because they don't have an active participation in public means in communication media. And so we have also tried to promote this by establishing a communication, for example, with newspapers, or to establish ethic codes, and also participation. And also let's apply this situation for children and adolescents that are living in centers. So it's important for them to be listened. And at institutional level, we have also a specific committee made up by adolescents. And so through this committee, we are able to understand which are their stances, their thoughts, to be able to translate them into actions. Second point, well, we have to ensure a safe environment. As the convention enshrines, the main responsible factor of the well-being of children are parents, but they are tutors basically, but they are not the only ones. We know that the convention obliges families to meet all the basic needs of their children. For this reason, one of the main action which has been undertaken by the Catalan syndic has been making pressure on the states for it to support families and help families to meet children's needs. For example, fight against child poverty, but also guarantee a positive parenting, but also measures of social educational support for the most vulnerable groups. And also a special action on children living in care centers or detention centers. Of course, these are even more vulnerable subjects because they are living in an alternative center. They're not living with their family, and therefore they're even more exposed, even more vulnerable. And sometimes they're living there for just a certain period, then they go back to their family. But sometimes they have more long-term stays, and especially in the Catalan setting, we find a high percentage of children living in these care centers. So it is our role of our ombudsman to ensure a safe environment through regular visits, detection of abuse. For example, we have intervened, especially in care centers, we have acted to make sure that, for example, their freedom was not limited, and so we have, for example, made investigations to ensure that the freedom of the children kept and treated for mental health reasons was not hindered. And this is a very important these have been very important actions, because we have realized that when the syndic visits these centers, well, these centers are the only ones which are basically made. So there is no other organs or bodies checking on these people, on these children. But in general, just to conclude, we have also offered structural changes to reduce the number of children living in these care or detention centers. Then we are fighting for these centers to be specialized, so for them to be able to meet with specific needs. The third function of the fifth that I have mentioned would be to promote more equalities, more equality for vulnerable children. Of course, the ombudsman is there to defend all children, but we need to focus more and specifically with a very proactive means and focusing us on the most vulnerable children, because normally we have less control on them because they don't know us, they cannot attend us. And for this reason, we have developed specific measures against child poverty, because we have a high percentage of very vulnerable children who require, for example, guaranteed income or legal guarantee of the right to an adequate standard of living. Then the child poverty rate in Catalonia, as again I said, is one of the highest of 30%. We have also acted to ensure more equality of fairer education. The educational system presents strong inequalities. So we are acting against the school segregation. So this universal right to education, which is enshrined by Constitution, which should be guaranteed to all children in Spain, concretely presents many inequalities. For this reason, we have developed specific measures to remedy these inequalities. We have also developed a pact, as I said, against school segregation, which I don't have time to explain. It's available on our website. And if you have, of course, any question you can ask. And of course, that's objective to prevent school segregation. Well, then our actions on unaccompanied minors, so to guarantee that they are treated as children before the application of migration policies, improvement of reception policies by the regional authorities, and we have done this by supporting policies at the initial moment. We know that these minors, unaccompanied minors, are first of all minors, but because they are also migrants, they are first subjected to migration policies, and we know it very well because as Italy, we are like important destination. We are important countries of destination, so we know that when we have unaccompanied minors and they are foreign adolescents and children, well, they are very vulnerable and they are first applied migration policies, and only in a second moment they are applied minor policies. And for these reasons, we have developed recommendations, reports to ensure that first of all, children's rights are enshrined before migration policies are applied. Then we have children with specific disabilities, so this is another very vulnerable group, and in this sense we have promoted structural reforms to guarantee that all services and areas of action are inclusive. What does it mean? It means that the children don't have to adapt to institutions or services. Quite the opposite. Institutions and services need to be inclusive, which often doesn't happen, because what happens is that we say this child requires a specific care, and so while it should be the school itself to adapt to the child, her or himself, and therefore what we witness is a considerable lack, especially when a considerable support is required. 2 more minutes to conclude. One of the main functions that we take care of is listening complaints from children, not necessarily from the most vulnerable children, but complaints about any aspect of a child's life. So these individual complaints have a value by itself, but sometimes they can be interpreted by the system itself, and by doing that, the system itself can also be improved. And last but not least, we need to make children visible and ensure visibility for them and for their participation in the political process. And this is done through the different actions we are carrying out, but specifically reports play an important role when these reports are presented as submitted to Parliament and to the Catalan and to the Committee for Children. We have presented an addition, basically 2 reports are presented. One is presented by the government of Spain, and another one, an additional one, is presented by us as the ombudsman. Both these reports, the national one and the local one, can be read on our website. They are not translated, not in all their parts, but of course, if you have any questions, we are here to answer, and of course, looking forward to receiving your questions.
Thank you, Maria Jesus, for presenting so clear the role of the regional ombudsman for the protection of children, and also for presenting the situation so clearly, so crystal clear, and where we are. So thank you a lot for your participation, and hopefully at the end we can have some questions and keep discussing. So thanks again, Maria Jesus.
Thank you.
So our 4th presentation, and we are running a little bit out of time, is from Professora Montserrat Gas and Professora Maria Fernandez Arrojo, which I have the pleasure to work with. So let me introduce first Professor Gas. She's a full professor of law at the University Internacional de Catalunya. And she has not 1, but 2 PhDs, one in European law from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, and a second one in canon law from the Pontifical University of Holy Cross. So currently, she's the director of the Institute of Advanced Family Studies, who runs 2 chairs, the IS Family Santander Chair on Family Solidarity, and the Childcare and Family Policies Chair funded by Joaquim Molins Figueras Foundation. On the other hand, Professora Dr. Maria Fernandez Arrojo, she's a professor of law at the University International of Catalonia. She has a PhD of civil law from the University of Navarre. And currently, if I'm not wrong, she's also the vice dean of the Faculty of Law at WIC. She's also a specialist of different fields, recently about parenting and filiation in the European legal system. She has recently published very interesting articles in this regard. And it's a pleasure to have you both of you here. So today, Professor Gad and Professor Fernandez Arrojo will talk about children's rights and policies in Europe, realities and challenges in Spain. So whenever you want, the floor is yours. And if I'm not wrong, this presentation will be also in Spanish. I checked the system and it's really super good and it really works very well. So you can switch the language and you can choose the language. So whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias, Mar.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your presentation. Thank you to all for being here. I'm going to share my screen with you.
Bueno, pues en primer lugar,
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the University of Padua. Thank you for having invited me in this intervention, and I participate in cooperation with the Universidad Internacional de Catalunya within a project led by Professor Aida. So I'm going to analyze the application of the Convention of Children's Rights in Spain and specifically in Catalonia, which is one of the richest region in Spain. So let's see how the European policies have changed our Spanish legislation in Spain and Catalonia, and we will focus specifically on children's rights. So this is the scheme, the organization of my speech. First of all, I will speak about children protection at the government central level, making reference to the national legislation and strategic objective of the Spanish policies. Then I will focus on the Catalonia policies, and then we'll speak about the challenges. At central level, so the legislation, the Spanish legislation presents Article 39 of the Spanish Constitution. This article enshrines a system of protection for families and minors, which has been considered as a mixed one, as a partially public. And it is based on a collaboration between the private sector and the public sectors through the working together to achieve the well-being. And speaking about the private sector, I make reference to the third sector. Then we have another law of 1996 about the legal protection of minors, considering minors as active subjects able to modify their own setting, their own social medium, and participate in their search and compliance of their needs. And in that sense, the ombudsman should take care of the children's needs. So this principle has been received by autonomous communities. And today we had the honor to have here the representative for the Catalan Ombudsman. Of course, I'm referring to Professor Lario. Then we have law of 2015 for the modification of the system of childhood protection. It has led to changes leading uneven protection for minors all over Spain, and this has been taken into consideration by autonomous community and translated into local legislation. And then Article 148 of the Constitution of 78, focusing on social services in Spain, establishing that autonomous community can take care of social services. Therefore, all the autonomous statutes have received and implemented the content of the article of Constitution, also in the field of the minors protection. I'd like to stress a few elements. First of all, our system of children protection is based on a structure based on a collaboration between the central and the regional system. And within this network, very important is the collaboration with the social services, with the educational and development services. Secondly, the well-being of children is considered as a shared responsibility between public administrations, families, and the third sectors. And we should underline that the third sector has witnessed and has widened its action by meeting the needs of many families and people which are partially or fully excluded by the public social protection system. So charity organizations, especially like the Catholic Church, and normally they have established themselves as provider of well-being services, and their activities has intensified starting from the from the 90s. So what we witness is considerable inequalities at legislative level, and especially between the different autonomous communities. We have established the need to establish a common national pact at national level to overcome inequalities. About the strategic objectives of the central policies for childhood in Spain, well, they should be embraced by this national strategic plan for childhood and adolescence, and by the action plan against the sexual exploitation of childhood and adolescence. So I'm going to focus especially on social, educational, and healthcare environments, but I will also comment cross-strategical lines applied to the childhood plans. So these are cross-strategic lines, so cross strategies, because they don't affect a specific area of action of the central administration. In quite the opposite, they embrace more environments, and specifically they concern support to families and fight against infant or children poverty. As for the first one, normally, Spanish policies are not addressed to children themselves, but to families. We have made a studies on the different types of well-beings, according to which Spain is considered a country having a familiaristic or model, or a Mediterranean model. This has been subjected to criticism because the real attention should be placed on children themselves. So why policies for children protection have adopted a family approach? Well, this has been underlined by the UNICEF report of 2014, and the reason is that children is our main a responsibility of families, while the investments for these are shared by all. The other cross strategy has to do with the fight against children poverty. Poverty has to do with the lack of economic means, also lack of social relationships leading to social exclusions, and also not the lack of access to basic services. So we have, as a country, uh, committed to meet the United Nations objective for sustainable development. Therefore, it is our duty to contribute to it. As for the objectives in the social field, the objective of these policies are vulnerable minors, vulnerable children. So in 2015, a reform was introduced by the law of 2015, and it was based on the European Union recommendation establishing that children have to grow within families. So it makes a distinction between between the family, foster family, and between and and also between also care centers or detentional center. And we know that unfortunately the percentage of children attending care centers in Spain is very high. So social plans recognize minors needing special attentions. These are not non-accompanied minors, infractors minors, children belonging to ethnic minorities, and minors with disabilities. As for the unaccompanied minors, so this is a phenomenon that we have been experiencing from the 1990s, but still will lack specific policies. So what we need is a strategic plan specifically addressing this. As for infractors minors, the lack of intervention has to do with the lack of support of the family environment, which means that only exceptionally and only with the approval of the judge, normally the ordinary means is basically detention with, with later a reinsertion. But when they belong to ethnical minorities, of course, in Spain we have migrants especially and gypsy communities. As for gypsy communities, we are witnessing numerous difficulties in the school environment. And as for the minors, the migrants, we're witnessing especially problems in terms of children poverty. And as for minors with disabilities, well, we need specific educational policies and an integrated educational model. Of course, everything has to do in the end with it's a problem of budget. As for the educational setting, one of the main challenges has to do with attaining quality education, which is the fourth objective of sustainable development or the UN. So this includes the prevention of dropouts, absenteeism, and special focus on children with special needs. For us to achieve the objective of a quality education, well, a special focus has to be placed on the establishment of the education and support to primary childhood. But the first challenge is fighting dropout, which has very much linked to social exclusion. So socially excluded children normally have very poor performance, which ends up in dropouts. As for absenteeism, so there are different factors influencing it, such as the lower educational level of parents or where they live. For example, in rural areas, the educational levels, alphabetization levels are lower. Also, girls are have a lower educational level. So the objective is avoid and fight against inequalities in all these areas. As for the healthcare setting, well, there are different strategies to be pursued, mainly organized in 5 points. First of all, fostering collaboration of the healthcare system and social system with the educational system by involving families and professors. Why? Because the quality of life is affected by the health itself. Then supporting minors' participation in access to healthcare services, therefore involving adolescents and children in the matter related to healthcare which directly interests and affects them. For example, we have a law from 2012 about the autonomy of the patients, which sees the fact that parents cannot represent legally their children from the 17th year. So when minor turns 17, parents cannot be represented. Adolescent with 17-year-old cannot be represented by their parents when medical decisions have to be taken. But also, of course, other aspects have to do with the mental health, sexual health, and alcohol or drug abuse. Well, there are actions by the European Commission and by the Committee for Children, which are working on the creation of a specific legal framework to deal with the healthcare, the mental health, the mental well-being of minors. And of course, then, as we said, sexual health and alcohol abuse and drug abuse, these are interlinked and they are both related to health matters and also to educational matters. Let's have a look at the legislation for Catalonia. So first of all, we have Article 166 of the Autonomy Statute, recognizing exclusive competences to the region in the field of promotion of families and childhood, and they include the protection of the social aspects and their implementation. Then we have the local Catalan law number 14 of the 27th of May on rights and opportunities of children and adolescents, and then the second book of the Civil Code on people and families. And then the Catalan law of 2001 of the 31st of December on minors justice, and it implements the law 5/2000 of the 12th of January. And of course, then we have the role of ombudsman and syndicate. And again, I thank Professor Lario for being here today. So let's see who is the body responsible for the children policies and adolescents policies. So we have the general direction for childhood and adolescenthood, and they are managed directly by the Secretaría de la Infancia, so the Infant Secretary of Catalonia. So it has a very specific political plan and an action plan, and with a specific strategic objectives in the social setting, educational setting, and healthcare setting again. And because I'm running out of time, I would like to go very briefly on this because again, we have already mentioned them. In the healthcare setting, basically the concerns that we have at the local level are the same that have been highlighted at the national level. And to conclude, all the challenges of the children policies in line with the recommendation of the Committees for the Rights of Children of 2018. So based on the report of 2018, which are the challenges that Spain is addressing. First of all, Spain needs to improve legislation. The committee has recommended an harmonization of the legislation to ensure that children's rights with less than 12 years are respected. Then as for the administrative coordination, so coordination systems should be improved between and among autonomous communities and within the central system as well. And in terms of channeling of resources, there is a concern about the low level of investments at the national level, because only 4% more or less of the national GDP is addressed to these investments, with a decrease from all over time. As for family policies, the committee underlines that Spain should reinforce its system of support to families, and in addition, to support concretely single parent families or poor family, unhealthy family, or unemployed families. As for independent follow-up, the committee has suggested fostering the independent following on the safeguarding of children's rights, fostering also the role of ombudsman. But as we have heard, the ombudsman works quite well. As for the social means, well, the committee is quite concerned for the high number of children living in care center or detention center. And as for health, the committee recommends an increase in the number of family doctors and ensure that family doctors for attending children have a special training, and also the development of a specific policy for children mental health, and then they suggest means to prevent the abuse of drugs. And finally, to conclude about education, the committee suggests and urges that something is done about to eliminate inequalities in education. And in this sense, they suggest fostering a national dialogue on what should be the basic characteristics of the national educational system. So thank you for having followed my intervention.
For presenting the realities and challenges of children's rights and policies in Spain. Happy to discuss this in our discussion. We are running super out of time. We should start now the discussion, but we have one more presentation. So let me just briefly introduce. So finally, after 3 different academics presentations, one from the Deputy of the Defense of the Rights of Children and Adolescents, now it is the turn to give the voice to the third sector, and who better than Ricardo Ibarra, director of the Platform of Children's Organization in Spain, for doing this. Ricardo Ibarra is a computer engineer and a master in human rights, democracy, and globalization. And Ricardo has been the president of the Youth Council of Spain, and since 2014, he is the director of the Platform for Children, a platform that aims to fully comply the rights of the children and adolescents in Spain. So without further delaying, and I'm so sorry, Ricardo, because I know that you have another meeting and you need to run and you will not be in the discussion. So sorry for this. And whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Okay, if it's not wrong, I will do it in Spanish if it's okay. Or
yeah, I think I think that we can have it simultaneous translation. So
perfect. So I'll go for Spanish then.
Very good.
Sure. Bueno, muchas gracias a la universidad por invitarme.
So thank you very much for having inviting me. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because I want to first to listen to my colleagues, not to repeat what has already been said. And so I like to show to narrate and share with you what we do with our platform for childhood. We have, of course, very short time. Well, this platform, it's a network involving all the childhood institutions working for the protection of children's rights in Spain, of course, within the convention. And each organization has the objective to identify problems hindering the safeguarding of rights and avoiding that problems replicate. So acting upon legislation, rules in order to remove these obstacles to the implementation of children's rights. We have been working in this for roughly 23 years, and our work is based mainly depends on the identification of what is the current situation. We work actively with the committees. So in order to understand, to identify which is the actual situation, and we participate, we take part in all the sessions of the committees, of the committee. And also, and then we identify which are the challenges at the central level in order to ensure rights. So I think that this has already been mentioned, and you can read everything about it on the report, the 5th and 6th, where we have analyzed many matters that has been shared with the committee, and there is also specifically dedicated one on the participation of children. So everything is accessible on our website. I like to say that starting from 2018, many things have changed. Well, there used to be problems that we have been tackling all these times, but of course, new problems that have emerged because of the pandemics. And this is quite an important concern that we have. We are concerned about the situation of the poverty of children, and this depends on a structural problem of our country, which has been existing for a long time. But because the current financial downturn, the problem has even worsened in this period. In the latest inquiry that we made last summer, we have witnessed an increase of 30, around 30% of the poverty among children, while in the other European countries there was a decrease. And because of the COVID, we esteem that the poverty has increased even more, will increase even more, and the gap will enlarge. Why? Because our government is investing very little in the protection of childhood. So we have very few means, very few tools. For example, we know that, for example, for retired people, well, they receive a pension, and this is a kind of safety network, but we don't have any similar safety network for children. We have very limited means. The kind of protection we can provide is very unequal, and actually we are the country with the least introduction of poverty. And this because we have very limited coverage compared to what other European countries do. Normally, they have universal coverage at European level, while the performance that we can provide, the coverage that we can provide is very limited. It can reach maximum 50 euros per family per month. So you can realize it is quite a limited contribution. And also we can address very limited range of income. We have, of course, prepared proposals. Well, the idea is to introduce a considerable improvement of the services provided and to have a more intense coverage of all the needs. We have been working on it. For example, working on the child. Also addressing those situations, so I mean, where we have non-wealthy family, but not even from the lowest income. So the need to be able to provide services through a wider range of income. And many of our means is addressed to fiscal protection, which is okay. And then we have small helps for very, very unwealthy families. But then we are cutting out many other families who are in trouble, who are poor, but not so poor. So what we can really act upon is a very limited part of our population. Therefore, our objective would be to have a wider coverage on all the disadvantaged situations. So this is the main challenge of our country, which is based on a, let's say, institutional problem. It's an organizational problem. It's a problem, and it requires a systemic change. Another concern, which has worsened with COVID, is education. On the one hand, we have switched to remote education, which is affecting the educational levels. Many children have problems in following schools and classes from home. We speak about 1 million of children who don't have computers, for example, or maybe have computers which are not sufficient, or maybe don't have internet connection, and for their experience is very important difficulties in following their classes. And of course, this is creating quite a considerable social and economic gap. But behind that, the Spanish educational system has has always had a problem in reducing inequalities, but also prevention of violence and other matters which really affect the families, and especially now that we are experiencing this second lockdown. It is important, therefore, to have means to prevent all this situation and to soften the impacts of the pandemics on children and their family, because again, we started from a very bad situation, so because we already had a very high rate of dropout in Spain, more than 27%, a very high rate of segregation as well. Uh, for example, the community of Madrid has the highest rate of school segregation. We have also many systemic problems that we are trying to tackle. For example, we have a specific plan for school failures, which is another matter of concerns for us. So many matters of concerns that we are trying to tackle. Then, about the prevention of violence against the children, well, it is a matter of a concern in any countries, because the data show us just a very small part of the problem, just the tip of the iceberg, because it's very difficult for children to report to report these situations and to make them known. Therefore, and often it is very difficult to understand what is going on, and many times, very often, these situations emerge very late when when violence has been perpetrated for a long time. Therefore, we are working on the recommendations of the committees based on the recommendation of the society, in order to create a specific law much more focused on prevention, which will complement an overall strategy. Now this law is being debated by the parliament, and of course we really look forward for it to be approved. It will be an organic law. So this is a very positive initiative, and Of course, we are working on in many fields, but the approval of this law would really mark an important milestone in the improvement of the protection of children. Then there is another concern that I would like to mention, which is the protection system, because we have had an increase, a major increase in children living within care centers. So we are working on especially on preventing this situation, so avoiding that such a large number of children are residing with a care center rather than with the family. And this can be achieved with a further additional support to families and to ensure a higher safeguards and protection of the family settings and the children's rights. Again, this has to do with the structural problems of our protection system. Other challenges for us, for example, we are the only country in the European Union which doesn't pay parental leave. Yes, we have the maternal leave and the paternal leave. For example, but we would like to work more on parental leaves, which would be very important, especially in this very situation of the pandemics, and in which like considerable parental leaves could play an important role when it comes to balance, for example, work and family life balance, having to attend children studying at home. So now that's come the time really to attack this problem, to tackle it, because now, because of the pandemics, it is really something urgent. So ensuring more parental leaves for the families to be able to cope with the pandemics. And then another concern is the importance to ensure children participation, for children to be able to express their thoughts, their stances on aspects which will influence their life, which could be matters related to the school, to the educational system. So we are working with the government, with a central council, and we are also trying to open a social debate on the role of the children as a subject of rights, not only as subject to be protected. So just to conclude, well, I hope I have contributed to tell you something new. I know that my previous speakers have been excellent.
It's a privilege to have you here. So thank you for your time. Sorry for being running late, but thank you for your time, for raising new concerns like the ones related with the pandemic, which are super interesting, and highlighting major concerns in our country, Spain. So thanks a lot, Ricardo. And thank you all for your lovely presentation. So it's almost 3:40, and now it's time to open the discussion to the audience. So please feel completely free to ask any questions directly to one of us, open via chat or by opening your mic. And you can do it, I think, in Spanish or English, and we can translate it. So feel completely free, and thank you all again. So Ida, if I'm not wrong, we can have like 10 extra minutes. Yeah. I see a question here in the chat, so I will read it, and then anyone can try to answer. So many thanks, this is from Ida. Many thanks to everyone for very interesting presentations. I would like to ask, from your experience, what are the determining factors in establishing national and regional priorities in the protection of children's rights in Spain? The question can be addressed to any speaker who feels in answering this. So thank you. So la pregunta no sé si lo han traducido, no sé si hacen la traducción inversa, no, pero sería que cuáles son los factores que explican, ¿no?, las prioridades regionales y nacionales en materia de la protección de los derechos del niño. ¿Quién se anima?
Bueno.
María Jesús, gracias. Thank you for being the first one. Question, so te lo agradecemos mucho.
Es una pregunta muy general y creo que la podemos contestar todos y todos y ninguno, porque a veces
Well, anyone can answer this question. As I commented before, well, childhood policies, well, sometimes are not considered as a priority. Why? Because, well, Maria has explained it from the perspective of the Committee for Children, but I believe that in some sense there is a gap, I believe, between what it is legislation, also you said it, Mark, on the childhood and adolescence, and looking at the legislation where the children's rights are recognized, are protected also for unaccompanied minors, because other legislation is rather good. But when it comes to reality, well, there is a lack of a result because, for example, there is a lack of commitment of political actors who do not work for the prioritization from the budget perspective. All of us has mentioned it. We have a high rate of poverty, children poverty, but we don't have direct aids for the family. We have subsidies, but which are not focused on childhood. And I believe that the help that we provide to families is ridiculous compared to what other European countries do. Just 1% of the GDP as against 2% of the European average. So it's just a matter of political will. So thank you for your question, but it's not up to us because we are here to urge for the politicians to prioritize these matters. And as I said earlier, and also my colleagues said that there is really a lack of awareness, a lack of representatives of pressure groups, and for this reason, the matter is not prioritized. And it's also frustration for me because one Monday we presented the annual report on children's rights. You can see it on the webpage, and we stressed the fact that the recovery, the economic recovery we had before the pandemic, so between the year 2000, let's say 2013, 18, we had an economic recovery in Spain, but we saw an increase of children poverty, which means that childhood policies are not prioritized at all. And then to conclude is that actions are taken in a very sectorial way, is that each department, education, health, childhood, so the services are kind of hidden among social services. For example, in Catalonia, we have a secretary which deals with many things, and in the end, it's very sectorial. So what we need is to have integrated policies. I don't know whether I answered you, but for sure, I share the fact that there is a lack of prioritization of childhood policies. Well, you explained it very well.
switch to English. Note that I wrote here in my notes that children don't have a pressure group, and I think this is more important than it's. So I never realized totally this because even I'm a parent, but we are not a pressure group to this. So I think that this topic that you raised, Maria Jesus, is more important than it's. So thank you for answering the question. I don't know if we have time for 1, 2 more questions. Again, as you know, speakers and participants, this session will be uploaded in YouTube, so we can have more visits and visits. So more questions. If not, I have a general one as well, but let's see if anyone has another question. So if not, I'm going to try to ask mine. So my question is regarding like the difference between children. Sorry, you're listening myself, no? So the difference between children policies and family policies. Because it seems that sometimes we develop like children policies from one side and family policies from one side, even as Maria Jesus now had mentioned. So sometimes we have Secretaría de Familia, Secretaría de Infancia, they develop their, but I'm not sure that they really are aligned or they fit. Or that. So my question, and probably it's super broad again, but it's, so do you have the feeling that we develop policies separate in purpose, and we should keep trying to do this because otherwise we forget like the child as a subject, but maybe now it's too much and we need to reconcile both policies again. So what is your feeling about the way that we divide children policies and family? So Aida or Maria, Ricardo is not here. Maria.
Well, I can say that with regard to Italy, what I observe is that there is also in Italy, as in Spain, a strong familiaristic approach, and the problem is when, like, for example, a clear example is in the field of children with disabilities. Families are given a lot of responsibility by legislative measures of Italy, but then the lack of implementation of these measures comes to put families in great difficulties in managing the protection of these children, the implementation of their rights. But like as for the law, according to the law, they have great responsibility in any case. So at the end, families are left alone, and can another, for example, also work-life balance issues in Italy. There is a strong legislation on this, but then this legislation is very poorly implemented, and so and also, for example, it's like constructed in a passive way, in the sense that families like these legislations do not permit, for example, to mothers to work in a week meanwhile, but they are like planned for mothers to stay at home and take care of children, which is of course better on the one hand, but on the other hand does not provide the possibility for mothers to work, and so this has consequences on children as well. So I think that we should really, governments should really divide the two aspects, and also so like family should be like divided from the protection of children. Protection of family should be divided. I also think that regarding the discussion, the previous discussion, that, for example, the European Union pose the protection, the promotion of children's rights a lot of times as a matter of like, we do this because in the future they will grow up like stronger also in economic terms. So it's more not, we are not protecting children because they have rights by nature, but because this is like useful in economic terms for the future. So I think that it's not only a lack of political priority, as Maria was saying, but this like political priority must be also like intended to protect children, as children, not only because they are adults of tomorrow. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Lovely, Simone, very clear. So I completely agree with you. I don't know if anyone wants to add something. And now that you raised also this topic about work family policies as Ricardo previously, so even this, when we talk about this, we normally have like adult perspective, and we think that work family policies is like a worker privilege or a worker right, or a parent's right. While at the end, and this is like the la premisa, the Nordic ones have in mind, child best interest and freedom to choose. So it's a child right to have parental leave, because it's the right of the child to be with the parents when they are babies, no? But even when we talk about this, we only have this adult perspective. No, this is a workers or a parents, right? But that was lovely. I don't know if we need to finish here. It's 3:52. Aida, the rest of you, I don't know if you have any other question. If not, I would like to thank first all the speakers, Aida, Simone, Maria Jesus, Maria Fernandez, Ricardo. Thank you for your lovely presentations, for raising this topic and sharing all your thoughts, ideas, all your research, all your actions. So thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you also for our participants. Thank you also for our future participants that we will have on YouTube. And thank you also for our interpreters. So I think it's Eva. I don't know if anyone else. So thank you, Eva. I think you're doing an amazing work and translating simultaneously all of us in this critical topic. So thank you all. And finally, thank you, the University of Padua, for organizing this.
And
So,
thank you so much,
Thank
Mark.
you very much.
Thank you so much for moderating this event. Thank you. It was very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank
Thank you for joining today.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.